This is an article that was published in the Detroit News, and because of a name that was mentioned in here, I had to know what it said. And I will have you know that I paid to get behind the paywall for this article. I could not find a way around it. I gave the Detroit News some money so that I could read this article. So, Mr. Donnelly, I hope you are able to do something with my funds. But because of the headline, because of the name that was mentioned in this article, I had to know what was going on here. And I had to see behind the paywall. So I'm going to bring you guys behind the paywall too. Because the headline to this article is very interesting. It says, Detroit-based exorcist goes on defense after credentials questioned. I always think it's so timely. Sort of a evidence of divine timing, if you will, how, and this has happened more than once, it's almost as if the minute that I decide to focus on a new rabbit hole or a new aspect of a rabbit hole that I've been down for a while or whatever, there will, that same week or within a very close time frame of me making that decision, there will be something that hits the news somewhere pertaining directly to the thing that I am getting ready to get into. And this is a perfect example of this. This was published January 21st. And it says that during a spurt in exorcists in the United States, a Detroit priest has made a name for himself. The Reverend Carlos Martins co-hosts a popular podcast about exorcisms and, in 2024, wrote what he hoped would be a bestseller about the practice. But that was before he was accused of not being an exorcist at all. And so this is him right here, Carlos Martins. Kyle Clement, and this was the name that jumped out at me, a longtime aide of another prominent exorcist, and that exorcist is Father Chad Ripperger, said he wasn't aware of any records showing Martins had ever performed an exorcism. Quote, "He is not who he says he is," Clement said during a Jesus 911 podcast in 2024. "The problem that I've got with Father Carlos Martins is he's opining and talking about things he doesn't know." Well, people in glass houses may not want to throw stones, Kyle Clement. Because do you know what you're talking about? I'm not convinced. By the way, Kyle Clement is not a priest, but he is an exorcist. Make that make sense. In November, Martins filed a defamation lawsuit against Clement and Jesus Romero, who hosted the podcast and also questioned Martins' credentials to expel malevolence from a person. Expel malevolence. Clement and Romero are followers of the Reverend Chad Ripperger of Keensburg, Colorado, one of the leading exorcists in the United States. Ripperger didn't appear on the podcast and wasn't named in the lawsuit. The lawsuit, filed in U.S. District Court in Detroit, said Martins wasn't required to file records of his exorcisms. It described the defendants as competitors who sought to hurt the sales of his book, The Exorcist Files. Clement and Romero declined to comment, but their lawyer defended their actions. Attorney Bill Burdett said the men were giving their opinions about a religious matter and therefore were protected by the First Amendment. Determining whether Father Martin is authorized to perform exorcisms turns entirely on the interpretation and application of Catholic faith, Burdett wrote in a pleading in the lawsuit. Burdett declined to be interviewed for this article. People might be shocked to learn how many exorcists walk among them. Once common during medieval times, they're enjoying a renaissance in the Catholic Church. The growth began with a decree by Pope John Paul II in 1999 that every diocese should have an exorcist, said Andrew Chestnut, chair of Catholic Studies at Virginia Commonwealth University. The pontiff was worried about growing paganism in the world. The United States, which has 197 Catholic dioceses, had a dozen exorcists in 2005, according to various estimates. Today, it has 180, Chestnut said, so it's shrunk. The great majority of Americans would definitely be surprised there are approximately 180 Catholic exorcists in the U.S., so that's one for almost every Catholic diocese. 197 Catholic dioceses and 180 Catholic exorcists in the U.S. alone. Despite the growth, exorcisms still aren't common. Yeah. Before performing one, priests are required to rule out other possible causes of a person's possessive-like behavior, according to church guidelines. The subjects undergo medical and psychiatric evaluations, which is where most cases end. And that is because the vast majority of the time, people who are acting crazy and spooky and like they're possessed, they're not really possessed at all. They need mental health support. their brain chemistry to be balanced, they need help. They need medical care, not holy water and a priest waving a cross in their face. Not going to do it. Not going to help. And in addition to not helping, it can actually do a lot of harm for a person who is not possessed, right? And we can get into the weeds on whether or not possession is a legitimate thing or not. I suppose it would depend on your belief and your perspective, and you're entitled to your religious convictions. But it's really dangerous for someone who needs mental health care, needs medical support, to come into contact with something like this, to be told that they need an exorcism or something like that, because you run the risk, and this has happened, unfortunately, of the fact that that person needing help completely being missed and everybody in their life going full bore ahead with an exorcism. This has resulted in deaths and just really, really tragic situations. And I think whenever I get to talking about the rabbit hole of celebrity exorcists more generally, that is something that I will get into in more detail then. The fallout and the harm that has been caused by people not following protocol, which the Catholic Church has protocol that people are supposed to follow if someone is believed to be possessed. And as this article rightly points out, two of the first things you have to do is you have to meet with competent medical professionals who are able to evaluate a person's physical and mental health competently. And if that doesn't happen, there can be a lot of problems. So, it gets into some details here about Martins. He was an atheist while attending the University of Waterloo in the Canadian province of Ontario, and he met a group of Catholic students there whose faith seemed to make them uncommonly tranquil, he said in a 2024 podcast, Capturing Christianity. Does not mention what group this was, but I would be interested to know. He found himself drawn to the group and accompanied them on a religious retreat, which eventually began his metamorphosis from non-believer to believer. Now, look, Opus Dei is not the only religious, not even the only Catholic organization that goes on retreats. Retreats are common. Lots of organizations have them. You could probably go to a different one practically every single week if you wanted to. So, like, that's not necessarily a proof positive that he went to a retreat, that it was like Opus Dei that he came into contact with. But because of the fact that Opus Dei is so present in education, particularly higher education around universities and that kind of thing, and then it talks about how he met these people and they invited him to go on retreats and blah, blah, blah. It feels very familiar. I feel like I've heard that story before, which again, I'd be very curious to know what group this was that he came into contact with. He said he found himself, drawn to the group. At 51, he said he didn't have to wait long for his first exorcism. Shortly after his ordination in 2003, he was assigned to a parish in Houston that was responsible for all the exorcisms in the archdiocese and surrounding archdiocese. 3 local priests were so busy casting out il diavolo that they farmed out minor exorcisms, such as for haunted buildings, to the young deacon Martins. He quickly felt like he had a knack for it. It says here, Martin said that he's asked to teach priests in the United States and other countries about exorcisms. In 2023, the Vatican wanted him to mount a campaign to dispel some of the myths about the practice, he said during a 2023 podcast by the Catholic Vote Advocacy Group. The first step was creating a podcast about the ritual. It always starts with a podcast, doesn't it? Martins is the co-creator and co-host of The Exorcist Files, which uses actors to reenact the priest's exorcisms. There's a really good chance you've probably heard of it. It's very popular. The podcast, available on Apple and Spotify, has been downloaded 4 million times and is among the most popular spiritual podcasts in the U.S., according to its website. And then he wrote a book of the same title, describing some of the cases from the program, that what he loves most about exorcisms is that they allow him to help Christ rescue lost souls. But now we're questioning the Exorcist street cred. It says Clement and Romero questioned Martin's legitimacy during 3 Jesus 911 podcasts in November and December of 24. Clement is a case manager for Liber Christo, a Denver group that provides training and exorcisms for clergy and laity. During the podcast, Clement knew just about every exorcist in the U.S., but Martin's name had never crossed his desk. The Catholic Church breaks exorcists into 2 categories. One is a permanent position, while the other is temporarily appointed for individual cases. The temporary appointments must be approved by the local bishop. Martin's lawsuit said that he is in the latter group. Clement said during the podcast that appointments are documented and recorded, but that there are no documents for Martin's according to the lawsuit. He suggested the priest only heard confessions but never performed exorcisms. Quote, when he tells a story of experiences when he was an exorcist, that title simply is not, he doesn't have that credential canonically, Clement said, and so he's using the term in a non-canonical way. Well, I guess it would take one to know one, Clement. When it comes to whether someone is doing things in a non-canonical way. The 3 podcasts where Clement and Romero discussed Martin's have been removed from streaming services, which is a common theme and has happened in the past. The public record definitely shows gaps in the narrative because there will be references to statements that Clement or Schneider or Ripperger or Romero or any of these other people in Ripperger et al. Controversial things that they have said have gotten pulled down. And so the shadow from the thing that they said is still there. There's still references to it in articles, blog posts, and that kind of thing, but you can't find the original source material because it got pulled down. And there's quite a bit of revisionist history going on in the narrative with Ripperger et al., in my opinion, anyway, based on the research that I've done and what I've looked at, which I am looking forward to sharing in the not-too-distant future. Martin's lawsuit said he received permissions for his exorcisms, but it wasn't mandatory to keep records of them. Romero emailed Martins to say he was aware of the priest's work with relics, but didn't know anything about his experiences as an exorcist. Apparently Martins, he has a bunch of relics from Catholic saints that he travels around with and displays for people to come and see, basically. And Romero asked Martins when Martins became an exorcist and which bishop bequeathed the title and in what diocese. And Romero said as a podcast host, he had received numerous questions about Martin's status as an exorcist and wanted to be able to answer listeners' queries. So in a terse reply, Martins ignored Romero's questions and said listeners should contact him through his relics group, Treasures of the Church, according to the lawsuit. So lots of back and forth and people not getting along well. Looming just outside the lawsuit is Ripperger, the prominent exorcist, and he does loom. He founded the Society of the Most Sorrowful Mother, a Keensburg, Colorado group of exorcists, and developed Liber Christo, whose training is based on his teachings. He's a prolific speaker and writer about exorcisms. So what's important to underline here is that Liber Christo is this method, this set of protocols, this tool that Chad created that is based on his teachings and his perspective as an exorcist. And as we've already seen, based on the other articles that I have presented talking about Chad, he kind of paints outside the lines, canonically speaking, with quite a bit of what he says. And believe it or not, that extends to Liber Christo. If you go Google Liber Christo, you'll find a website. You should take a look at it and just see what he has to say. Of course, Chad declined to be interviewed for this article, and they note that Martin's book, The Exorcist Files, ranks 37,641 on Amazon's top sellers list. I have no idea if that's good or not. During the Catholic Vote podcast in 2023, Martin said he worked on the book for several years and had his material reviewed by 25 exorcists, psychiatrists, psychologists, theologians, and philosophers. That book, if I do say so, is the greatest work that I've ever done, Martins said. So I wanted to read this story because it adds some more meat to the bones of the celebrity exorcist animal that I am introducing everybody to. Introduces you to some new names, some new little bits and pieces of information, and I just wanted to go over this here for the newsroom analysis because I feel like it's very pertinent, and I appreciate the reporting that the Detroit News is doing. Although it is too bad it was behind a paywall.